Politico's out with some new reporting about how the Trump team is attempting to prepare for the debates against Biden. You recall, of course, Saagar, from back in 2016. Trump was not too into this whole prep thing.
Yeah, right.
It's not really his bag in particular, so his aides are trying to figure out how best to corral him and how best to prepare. And, you know, it's interesting because it seems like from reading this piece, there's kind of a split view of Biden. On the one hand, there's the camp that's like, oh, he's in decline and he can't finish a sentence, and so we're going to try to trip him up, and here are some things that we could say to get him to, they said, reboot.
Yeah.
And there are other people that seem to be taking him more seriously. It's basically like, look, he sort of wiped the floor with Paul Ryan back in 2012, something we highlighted here yesterday. And he's just been doing this for a long time. So even if he has slowed down a bit, there's just so much muscle memory and recall. He's been answering these questions for like 40 years that it becomes harder to trip him up. I would say one other thing, you know, in comparison to Hillary Clinton, part of why her performances can be so cringy is because everything is so practiced and rehearsed and recited. And Biden, look, he can go all over the place. I would say his primary performances were a real mixed bag, but he doesn't have that same, like, now I'm going to land a zinger quality to him that is just like the worst to me.
Trump trickle down.
Oh, no.
But I actually think it's a smart strategy. If you do see where Biden's greatest public missteps have come from, it's when he feels challenged on something he's not comfortable on.
Yes.
So race, Kamala Harris, the "you ain't black" moment with Charlemagne the God. These are the things where he really gets angry and he gets frustrated. So one of the things that the Trump advisors leaked to Politico is that they notice when Biden says, "come on, man," whenever he feels frustrated. So they are trying to identify phrases and triggers him to, quote, reboot, give that "come on, man," where he gets very flustered and he'll be like, okay, now I'm giving my time back to the floor. But here's the thing. To do that, you need to hit him on things that he is not practiced for.
Right.
Biden can take radical socialist, radical leftist
all
stuff
day long.
All day long. Defund the police. He can say, I support the police. He actually released a number of supporters who are law enforcement officials who endorsed him today. He's very well practiced for the socialist attack, the defund the police attack. He's not ready for China. He never had to answer for it once. What else did we see on the stage during the Democratic primary? Cannot handle Iraq. He got absolutely destroyed whenever it came up to the Iraq War.
His answer on that is an incoherent mess.
I supported it before I was. He basically John Kerry'd himself. I voted for it before I voted against it.
Yeah, that's true.
Those are the things where you got to absolutely hammer him home. Same on NAFTA. He's never once had to answer for NAFTA, or the fact that whenever he voted for NAFTA, he was like, well, this is going to help my home state of Delaware. There's a Chrysler factory. What happened to that Chrysler factory? Closed during the Great Recession. These are the things that you could really destroy Biden with, and I really think he would begin to crumble if he did.
Part of the problem for Trump this time around in the debates is that he doesn't have anything to say.
Yeah.
I mean, just plain and simple. Like, last campaign, he didn't really have to practice because he was doing the rallies. He knew what he was all about, and he knew what the contrast was with Hillary Clinton. They're all over the place in terms of an affirmative. I mean, he doesn't even know how to answer the question of, like, okay, what are you going to do in your next administration? He's like, well, this, and we'll further that, and we'll strengthen, and we're just going to keep continuing down the road. Yeah. I mean, literally not anything coherent about what are you going to do in your next administration. So not only does he not have an effective blow that he's landed against Biden, but he also doesn't have an affirmative message that makes any sense either. So that makes it hard to perform really effectively in a debate. I mean, debates are all about, like, people who are very effective in debates, they come in knowing what they want to say, right? They come in knowing, like, here's the message, here's the frame for me, here's the frame for my opponent, and they land those blows. If you're sort of mushy and all over the place on those pieces, then it's not going to amount to much. I would say we played it here in his RNC speech. He had that great line about Joe Biden
40 years
hugged working class people, took their money, and shipped their jobs overseas.
That's great.
If we see more of that, like, that's the best that I've seen him do against Joe Biden. But what have we seen this? We haven't heard any of that this week.
No, certainly haven't. And I think this also applies to Biden, which is that if Biden comes in with soul of the nation, Charlottesville Biden, I don't think that's going to land at all. I think it has to be much more hey, this guy said he would do the job. Manufacturing index is down. He needs to be ready. He needs to go after the core promises against Trump, but I don't think he's really equipped for that either.
See, I disagree, though, in that, look, Biden's up. He doesn't really have to do anything but just not screw up. And so he's been doing the soul of the nation stuff and the let's come together and let's be unified stuff. I think that's enough for him. Yes, it'd be better if he was like, here's my healthcare plan and here's how we're going to get the economy back and here's how we're going to protect your jobs. Of course, that would be a better framing because if you ask the American people, number one issue is healthcare. Right. Number two is economy. Coronavirus is obviously top of the list, top of mind, which he does a pretty good job on in terms of here's my plan and lay it out and just exuding this is going to be a competent government response. But he doesn't need to do anything to shake this up. Trump needs to really land a blow. He really needs to have Biden sort of collapse on stage in the same way that Bernie did in the primaries.
That's right.
And when it really came down to it and Biden needed to deliver, he stepped up to the plate and he was able to handle it fairly effectively. So I think it's a challenge. I actually think it's a challenging landscape for Trump because he needs to make something happen. It's not good enough for him to just outperform Biden. He actually needs to trigger some sort of a meltdown of Biden in order to get back into the race. And I think that's actually a really hard thing to make happen.
I think that's smart.
All right, more Rising for you after this.